one phrase they used to tell each other is like, I'm not going to jail for you.
Oh.
Welcome to Women in Quantum.
Welcome to Women in Quantum, the series where we spotlight the brilliant women shaping the future of deep tech. I'm Candace Gillhooley, and in each episode, we go beyond the headlines to explore the real stories, career pivots, and bold ideas driving the quantum ecosystem forward. Whether you're quantum curious or already building in the space, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Today, we're speaking with Sierra Klaus, and she is a managing partner at Barclow Venture Studios. Hi, Sierra. How are you today?
Hi, Candace. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really excited because I remember quite a bit about our pre-call, and I was like, oh, this is going to be an interesting, exciting episode. I really want to talk about your journey. So let's start at the very beginning. Can you tell me where you were born and raised?
Yeah, so I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, but I ended up growing up in Denver, just outside of Denver in Aurora, Colorado. It's interesting to be an adult and have a family, have kids, and make decisions about relocating and all that around career, especially because that's how I ended up growing up in Denver. My parents had at one point both worked for United Airlines. My dad actually ended up retiring from there after 40 years. But they were closing the office in Cleveland, and they gave him the option to go to Chicago, Charlotte, Honolulu, or Denver, with the added bonus that if he did decide to go to Denver, he could help wind down Stapleton's airport and be part of the brand new build of what would be Denver International Airport as
Oh,
part of customer service. And so he thought that that sounded like a great opportunity, and there was so many people moving to the area at the time. So I guess I kind of just came from a background of people who would be willing to take a chance, see about bettering, things for themselves, their families, and be open to those sorts of career pivots and those kind of projects that could define the rest of your career.
okay. So as a young lady, all the way back in grammar school, what was your favorite subject?
Oh man, I think it was a tie between English or language arts because I loved to read. Um,
Okay.
but one of the things I really loved to read was, I guess, more so in the it would split between like history and geography, that sort of thing, because I've just always been so fascinated with how people have lived in different times and in different places.
Okay, so when did you stumble into science?
It's interesting. It's less that I stumbled into science and more that I developed an acute awareness that everything comes from something. you know
Okay.
and when you look out into the world and you give yourself a pause to think about how do things work, like when I was growing up, we didn't have a computer in our house. There were only computers at school. So I grew up in the 90s, and our family wasn't in a position to afford a computer, so we would use the computer at school or we'd go to the library. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, what makes these things so expensive? Like, they're not like a bike or like something else you could put on your wish list, and your parents would be like, yeah, that's not like something you're allowed to circle in the JC Penney catalog quite
Right.
yet. It was that time. And so as I grew up and I had more of that awareness, I've just always been very curious. You start to realize that so many of the kind of modern amenities or things that you think are really cool even as a kid, there
Hmm.
is like this basis of engineering and production and shipping and like all of these components that go into the things that you like and use every day. And for me, I kept finding that at the basis of the things that I really liked was a bunch of science and engineering, and a lot of different systems that made all of that possible.
So where did you go to university and what did you major in?
So I did my undergrad at Ohio State. So I grew up in Colorado, came back to Ohio to go to Ohio State. I studied in the business school on a track specialized around supply chain and logistics. Going back
Interesting.
to the whole like everything comes from something, it's from
Right.
somewhere. with a whole
Okay.
lot of someone's behind it. So I had an internship through the Inroads internship program. So I'm an alumni of that incredible opportunity. And what it does is it allows college students to be sponsored by a corporation in a specific mentor department. They focus primarily on women and underrepresented groups at the time in engineering, business, and nursing. So I was selected to be a part of the internship track at what's now called L Brands. But at the time, it was the limited and limited logistics services. So that was Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works, Abercrombie, Express. All of those were under one roof at that time.
Okay.
But I was an intern during a lot of that kind of retail consolidation, a lot of things going to private equity, a lot of things spinning out. Um, and really having, that was part of the experience was that you'd be able to take on these different roles, do these different reports. And if you were invited back every summer to be mentored and continue your internships, you could be presented with a full-time offer. And so I did that every summer through my undergrad. And I was even invited to do a part-time HR operations gig at the distribution center during a couple of the years I was at Ohio State. And so it was a very hands-on contact sport kind of way to see how things worked across. I had been in regulatory and compliance, distribution center operations, HR for that, upgrades of systems where they're using sensors and conveyor belts and all of that to really upgrade the accuracy of reading shipping labels and making them on like a streamlined, optimized path between inbound and outbound. And then all the different sort of operations and things in tech that would support that. So technology at that point was just embedded in everything that we did. And I didn't realize at the time, because this was the early 2000s, I didn't realize at the time how quickly the industry I was a part of was moving into these sort of optimization models. And we were using simulators and we were using all of these things around like logistics and routes because the competition and the cost and everything, when you looked at like UPS having the no left turn rule, or Walmart vendors and suppliers having to comply with very specific like specs for the product shelf space that they were even allowed. And then you look at inventory management, palletizers. There was all these different things that had all of these underlying technologies and analytics, what people would call later that. And what was really fascinating to me, like looking back on it, was that you had to have dashboards. You had to have numbers, you had to have estimates, you had to have risk management. These were all things that were just part of how you do like that whole domain of supply chain and logistics and very applied in specific ways. It wasn't until later that I understood that outside of like logistics and supply chain, like marketing would then be introduced to this concept of dashboards as like a standard practice. Some
Okay.
people call it the metritization of American business. So there was like manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, finance. There was like a handful of industries in America where it's like, well, of course you want the biggest, best, smartest calculators and systems and data and all of that to do that. And then that started finding its way into like almost everything in the business world. So I think about that a lot as we do what we're doing with our venture studio and commercialization, like how things actually get out of these very niche spaces and find their footing and their value and their application in ways that are specific and tailored to other people who might find it useful.
Okay. Okay, so now you're in logistics and business and business process organization. So, okay, and this is undergrad. So now what did you do for your master's?
Well, we do have a blip between the master's and undergrad because, the best laid plans of getting that full time offer. I graduated in 2008, 2009.
Oh,
So
okay, in recession. Okay.
that's
So that
right.
was,
So
yep.
yeah, so the company had already been consolidating and kind of spinning off different things. And it wasn't that logistics and supply chain was going away. It was just that roles outside of the distribution center and some of that seasonality wasn't going to be as available. And so I took a break and had my kids and stayed home with them for a bit. And I spent a lot of time reading because when I had three little ones at home, there would be times where the only adult I would see was their dad and the ladies I'd see at church on Sunday, and that
Right.
that would
And that
basically be it.
make you go crazy. It really
That's
like
right.
love children. I have them, but Yes, you need adult interaction and adult conversations about all kinds of things to stay sane, for sure.
Yes, it's true. And I love Elmo. I do.
Right.
I still love
Of
Elmo.
course. But there's a time and a place. There's a time and a place, right? And it's nice to wrap your mind around, real world, real world problems and, adult situations. So I completely understand that. Okay. So you
Yes.
had the blip. Now you went. So, okay. So then you went to get your master's.
That yes. So in the time that I was at home and I had a lot of time on my hands and needed to do a lot of reading, I kept finding myself really once again drawn to how, like, yes, people promise technologies will be disruptive, but then this was also a time where, like, the recession and lots of other things, like across housing, construction, supply chain, like all the knockdown effects, retail. uh, I mentioned my dad had was at United Air Travel.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was at United Airlines and serving in the best capacity he could. He actually got recognition for supporting his coworkers and crew and a lot of people after 9/11. And then
Okay.
from in very short order, you go from that to what happened in 2008, 2009. And so when I have this blip and I have this pause, I think about like what happened with my dad's career. I thought about what was happening in all the careers around me. I was still living in Ohio at the time. There was a lot of like offshoring impacts that were happening like in parallel to all of this. So I really thought long and hard about like what do I want to do when I go back to the workforce,
Right.
and if I do get something that would help me advance like in terms of my education or career, what would I want that to be? And I ended up, like in the course of thinking about this, I knew I wanted to do something within technology because I wanted to understand and maybe be like a more mindful part of like how we implement these sorts of technologies and how can we try to minimize some of this like job disruption and how can we be smarter about like talent and skills. All of those things were top of mind for me. And a friend of mine at church had offered to introduce me to some folks who had a managed service boutique IT firm. And she had said like if you're interested, like she goes, I'm new to IT as well, and I got some great mentorship, and it would be like in the recruiting area. And I was like, you know what, that does interest me because I had that stint in HR operations at the distribution center.
Okay.
I had done like hiring events, like all those sorts of things as part of that experience. And I also wanted to understand like what does it actually take to do these jobs? Like what are people hiring for? Like what do they pay people for? What are their skills? And so I had that opportunity. I was like it was definitely it was so challenging. It was a great learning experience. Um, it was highly competitive because we were at a small boutique firm and you had these like big like sort of like consultancies and talent recruiting firms like your tech systems and your experience type sort of organizations. And so like the kind of speed and learning why you lost a deal or even just learning about like how do you even get into these vendor management systems to work with these enterprises. All of those things, it was a great experience. They had some hard times as well there on their team, so I ended up transitioning to a role where briefly I was working in financial services. So I was at New York Life. I was getting my series licenses. So I was working my way through it. I just had got the one around mutual funds, and then somebody from the IT recruiting team called me and said, "Hey, you know how we used to recruit for those like project management roles and all of that with our clients?" I said, "Yeah." They're like, they're actually looking for somebody who could be new to tech. They want them to have a financial background because you're going to need to own budget and scope and schedule. Risk and contingency funds, like that sort of thing, and they can teach you the rest. They have a pretty rigorous system. What do you say? So that's how I got my first proper IT role. Was working in healthcare supply chain logistics company, and from there that's actually when I decided to pursue my master's, and I ended up being in a program for what's called Masters of Science in Information and Knowledge Strategy.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that's in the one of the grad schools at Columbia, the School of Professional Studies.
Okay.
Um, so I chose that because, as the name indicates, right, there's a science to how you take all this information and knowledge
Yes.
that we are flooded with,
Mm-hmm.
and how do you use that science and learn your own sort of art around going from strategy to execution to operations. So I had that kind of operations bottoms up, middle out view, that strategic piece and having frameworks and knowing how to like know up from down when you analyze a product or a new technology and think about its downstream and upstream implications. So that really appealed to me, and I was able to get into the program. And so I was working I eventually got promoted to a project manager, and so I was doing that and going to school
Okay.
at the same time.
And
I was
raising little ones.
Yes, yes. It takes a village. It was very much a team effort. I was fortunate enough to get a fellowship from the American Association of University Women, as part of being in that program those couple years. And I'm still friends to this day. I'm in the wedding party of one of my buddies from that program coming up here pretty soon. And that was over 10 years ago. So it's true what they say. If you find the right sort of program and the right sort of fit for those things, you really can make lifelong friends. You can have these opportunities that like not just change your life, but change the way you see the world, so that
Mm-hmm.
you can just be more mindful, intentional about where you want to go, with a lot of turmoil. I'm definitely one of those like millennial career women who like turmoil has just been the order of the day, right? And all things work, and it's just like which kind is it? Like I mentioned I grew up in Colorado. When I was 12, I was 45 minutes away from Columbine, and so we grew up under like that zero tolerance thing at a time when kind of the rest of America was hoping that was like a bit of a one-off. But
Right.
but the schools and the rules and everything that changed after that for us in Colorado was very distinct. I would learn later, but I mean, it was Columbine, and then it was 9/11, and then there was the financial crisis, and then we're still kind of fighting our footing after all of that. And so I actually thought I had a bit of a break until 2020.
Right. And then
I
and then
thought
the
I caught a
pandemic.
break. Yeah. So, but here we go again. So, but I only share that to say that the thing about technology and just the way that the world was working was, it's just like you have to be adaptable. You can't not be adaptable. I knew that there were a lot of people, but like culturally, generationally, etc., and just honestly like the hope of like my dad, where like you get to retire after 40 years with one company. Like
Right.
people like that. Like people have a lot of respect for and desire for like the discipline and consistency and stability that comes with growing in a handful of roles that you stay in for years and letting that
Yes.
define your career. But from the time I was an IT recruiter, and I think even more so now, there is always this risk of not just disruption, but like obsolescence.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and it happened so many times in so many ways, in so many like things I've observed in the world and in my life, that I just couldn't really, like, I guess, accept that we were going to ever go back to that, or that was like a thing that you as like a woman, a working mother, can expect
Mm-hmm.
if you really want the job to even cover the cost of your childcare.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
So
anyway,
I'm
so
like,
that
I'm just
so
like, I'm like, I'm all about what you're talking about. I completely understand what you're talking about, right? Like when I was in uni, like the first positions I had, like didn't even exist. Like everything kind of was made up, and then it was recession after recession, '07 and 9/11, and then in 2007, and then again, and then you had pandemic, and it made it very hard to get your footing, and be able to kind of nurture and build, a singular career path, right? Um,
yeah,
like my father was an IBMer. He worked there for over 35 years, right? I grew up with the same kind of mentality. Like my parents worked somewhere, and you thought, okay, I find somewhere and I work somewhere, and then I develop myself and I'm not leaving. But that's just not the way it's done anymore. So, okay, so now so when did quantum enter your world?
yeah. So yeah, this is the fun part. So I um I graduate from Columbia. I get an opportunity to join EY, as a consulting gig. They were one of the capstone sponsors, not my group sponsor, but one of them. It's why you go to these programs. You hope you can get that aligned next step up, in terms of your experience and career. And then I found myself very quickly working with some like the Microsoft track folks and all of that. And I ended up relocating in 2019 to Seattle from Ohio.
Okay.
So So that big move, that's the big move that
That's a
kind of
big move.
catalyzed big move. And I had always I had been in emerging tech without knowing it. Because
Okay.
as I had said, like the whole like, oh, like we're gonna do big data and analytics. And I'm like, oh, I recognize this stuff from logistics, but the rest of the world is just like, hey, like what is this IBM Watson? Like, what is this Hadoop thing? Like, how do we use it? Like, and now that stuff just like runs in the background. You can have all these APIs,
Hmm.
so I hadn't known that. But by the time I moved to Seattle and I'm working at Microsoft, I'm working in the field with enterprise customers, and then I get an opportunity to move to a global strategy team doing playbooks around uh, once again a new technology, a new feature in Microsoft 365 security. So I'm right back onto here's a new thing that somebody built, it does cool stuff, how do we get people to know it, use it, like it, buy it, kind of thing. And then I had an incredible opportunity to go to Xbox, which was, I mean, all the things we're talking about were at play there, no pun intended. But it was just so fun. It was the first time I had worked at a technology like based company that is not only not perceived as technology, it's gaming, right?
Right.
It's not the tech, it's what you do with it, and what you do with it is game. And there are communities, and it's one of those things where you're working on something that is so loved,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
so loved. I've only had the chance to work on enterprise tools that were on their best day, like tolerated, like.
Right.
And people cannot wait to log off, take their PTO, put that out of office on, they're done. And this was a place where people would want to log off at work so they can log in and play. And I loved that. And it was during this time that I had been approached with an opportunity to to join a blockchain startup that was spinning out of Meta. And this is where it gets interesting because I'm starting to be very interested in security. I'm starting to, because it was modern work and security, and so much of the rightful customer questions and enterprise rigor. It was a lot. It was less of like the sales team having to get budget and all of that, and it was more the security folks wanting to be like, hey, do we have the right like granular controls for this subscription tier that we're looking at? And then within gaming there was obviously there's security around like credentials and people's money and like all of that, and how they payment methods in Game Pass, but there was also Xbox player safety. My kids love Minecraft. We got a chance to like tour the Minecraft studio. They take that stuff very seriously.
Hmm.
And so there's all these technical security components to that as well. And so by the time I'm looking at this blockchain startup, I'm thinking about security. There's a big focus on like decentralization and privacy. There's definitely a gaming use case. And then there's cryptography because
Ooh.
blockchain.
Right.
and
Exactly.
so I guess I put that out there as a plug to some of my like the blockchain friends or some of the Web3 et cetera people. Is like, please remember that blockchain is not just crypto. Blockchain as an applied technology has cryptography, and this era that we're going into is going to make cryptographic proficiencies of all kinds very important. As we think about how we're going to navigate a lot of these like these threat cases is what I call them, right? So you have your use case, but there are threat cases. So whatever, when we think about something that's a tool, there are ways that you do need to think like a bad actor, and in ways that it could be weaponized. So anyway, so that's kind of how like my curiosity. So I didn't know that I was on that quantum track looking at security and cryptography
Right.
until it like clicked.
Okay.
Because it's like you said, like the words and the terminology and the language for it,
Hmm.
it didn't really exist, or like it at least hadn't like reached my bubble or like any sort of mainstream or like kind of critical mass for people to know like, oh, that's what that is, right? Like that's
Right. Right.
that's what we're talking about here. And so it was during that time at the blockchain startup that I met my current co-founder. So he was working, and not just working, he was managing and had founded a really amazing marketing agency that was doing all kinds of like, just it was really like a creative studio that was doing amazing things around branding, in-person event activations. So they were doing a lot of this ecosystem work where things were just a lot easier, cooler, and more fun, the way that they would introduce people to these different products and experiences. And so I really love that about what he was able to do and what he was working on. And we had just stayed in touch over the years. I always give him kudos at this part of the story when people ask about how we met or know each other, because he was literally one of the few guys that I met that like he loved his wife loves him, he loves his kids love him, and that's still the case to this day. And it was honestly just so refreshing to be around something like that, particularly like at that time within like very tech bro, like that sort of like kind of heavy crypto culture.
Okay. Okay. That's fair. There is
uh
a very tech bro culture in crypto. You're right. You're right. So that probably was very refreshing.
yeah, he stood out for all the right reasons, as well as like the guys that he hung out with. So that was that that's one of those things when people talk about the intangibles, you know, like how do you know you can work with a person, how, you know, that kind of thing. And for me, i I get very uncomfortable when we kind of have this abstract idea of, I don't know, Candace. I feel like you and I we could do a whole separate other episode around how, you know, how we remember how back in the day we used to talk about business ethics.
Mm-hmm.
When's the
Mm-hmm.
last time you heard? So, see, you see, like, so you know,
Especially,
there
well,
was,
think about what's going on with AI. I mean, think about what, Musk's new, AI engine that, will create nudes. Like, why? Like, there's why? Like, there's no, like, where are the breaks? Where's the governance? There needs to be rules because there are bad actors who will do things, and we need to protect people. It's just, the technology is moving so quickly, right?
yeah, and yeah, and that was it. Like that was, I mean, and it's interesting too, right? Because within like the blockchain space, etc. I mean, this has actually been in the news. This is actually somewhat contemporary, where part of the reason I was so interested in blockchain as for a tool to democratize like getting people access to finance,
Hmm.
right? So even now, I've advised on and like talked to some folks. It's like we're like, oh, like stable coins, crypto is a Ponzi scheme in America, and it's like, well, if you're in Bolivia or if you're in Argentina, if you're there's places where having a stable coin and it has like backing and liquidity and stuff, and it keeps its price and you can transact in it better and more reliably than what you have going on, that's a big deal. Like that can be life changing for you, right? That's why I spent a lot of time when I was in blockchain abroad. And there's nothing illegal about like getting people access to like the financial sort of things that they can afford. That's why it was called decentralized finance, right? And
Exactly.
but what's in the news now is like people like myself and my co-founder and others who are working in the space around those sorts of applications. We were always constantly up against this whole thing of like, well, you know, that's the Silk Road currency, right? That's black market, gray market stuff. Like what's happening, this whole like tragic situation with the kidnapping of Savannah Guthrie's mother, right? They asked for
Mm.
the compensation in Bitcoin, and people are like, "Oh yeah, like all that stuff is criminal." It's like, well, that if that's how
No.
you're socialized, right? Like if that's how, I mean, because that's the thing, you could say that about honestly any form of money. I don't know a form of currency that isn't used and
Right.
implicated in criminality anywhere. But when people don't know, or you can have use cases and then you can have something that's useful to them. And so
Correct.
that what I just shared with you about people who don't have access to a credit union or Chase, you know, people don't have the FDIC. That's an American institution, right? Like that's
Right.
not, you know, like we like they don't have lots of countries, they don't have something like a Federal Reserve. They don't have like these, and even if they did, they just now got like access to like internet sometimes, and they're
Hmm.
dealing with rolling blackouts. How do you create a financial sort of access point and system for folks in those austere environments? You know, and so anyway, so I think about this stuff because it's like going back to like this idea of ethics and like what you can do with technology. And to me, like the green flags, I mean, I think all of us can name our yellow and red flags about what we're comfortable with and who we do and do not want to hang out with. But I bring up the thing around like ethics and like, you know, how I was confident when my now co-founder approached me about the venture studio. I don't really like this whole thing where we don't even talk about ethics, we just talk about compliance,
Okay.
right?
Hmm.
Right? It's like we don't do things like on principle. We do things based off of what we can and can't get away with. Is kind of what that implies. So
Basically, right? It's
or get
true.
caught, right? So
Hmm.
I'm not a fan of that. And maybe it's because like I have kids or whatever. But to me, it's like I don't think I should be in business with people like in close proximity that way that I would not want like my kids around.
I think that's totally fair. I think that that's a hard line to draw, but I think that if you want to raise your family in a certain way and you want to live by a certain set of ethics, then it should spill over. What you do in your personal life and in your business life, that you've got to feel like you're doing the right thing on both sides. And if you're not, then obviously you're doing something wrong, right? I
Well,
mean,
well, yeah, and it's I did advise a company briefly, or organization, I should say, where sometimes when they call you in as a consultant, you are accidentally like a family counselor, right? Like you're
mhm,
you're just thrown into all the dysfunction. Like that's part of why you're there. It's like you're supposed to be a part of a team that helps people navigate all this dysfunction, a lot of hurt feelings, sometimes a lot of bad blood, that kind of thing. And try to reset, find a path forward for whatever you've been assigned to. And I remember there was this one organization was really rough like that. But one phrase they used to tell each other is like, "I'm not going to jail for you."
oh,
And while
interesting.
on the one hand, it's like, yikes, like I wish that was like not in like the chat on a regular basis, but like going back to what we talked about, like turmoil and
Hmm.
desperation has many outlets.
Hmm.
And the risk, like I think we used to talk about some of this thing, we're talking about like personal ethics and all this and who we work with, especially with new technology and like money and hype cycles. When those things kick up, there are people who do overreach. There are people who do. It's called a greed and fear index for a reason, right? So when that greed and fear index thing kicks up around the thing that you're working on, and I promise this is going to get to quantum and why this stuff is important to have many people, is that we know time and time again that greed fear dynamic, it leads people to make some pretty risky choices
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
other people around them may or may not know about, that other people around them may be forced to aid and abet. And some of the turmoils you and I have been talking about in our careers, you see the collateral damage, and it is a lot of like women's careers, early career folks, that kind of thing, older workers who are closer to retirement. There's a certain kind of worker who is most at risk for the shakeout of those sort of greed and fear and desperation
Right.
responses. And and so I do think it's good and healthy as we talk about innovation and we talk about security and we talk about bad actors. One of the things that we all the time in cybersecurity is the insider threat,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
right? And so it's like, the more promising and high potential something is, the more it draws in that kind of attention and those sorts of elements. And I only wish that maybe somebody like you, Candace, had a podcast like this, and I was maybe a little younger, but maybe it'll reach somebody now, and somebody would tell me like, hey, sometimes you are going to have standards. Like, if I don't want this person around my kid, I only want them this far into my circle, right? If um if I have to ever be tempted to say the phrase, "I'm not going to jail for you," it's already gone too far.
100%. 100%. I totally understand what you're saying, and it kind of blows my mind that you actually saw that on a chat internally. That just would give me pause to say, what's going on? Like, what's really going on here, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, right? Because as soon as that happens, it's like, oh man, do I even want to know what's really going on?
Right? I'm like, I don't know, think I want to even know, right? I just know that I want to see my way out of this, right?
Yeah, and so this does get into like, how I find myself fully like bought into like what I want to work on within quantum technology and emerging technology, because as I'm at that blockchain startup and I'm traveling and we're looking at like all these things around ecosystem. There's these different builder house events we would do around like more specific education hackathons. I was on an ecosystem program that worked very closely with developer relations, and then we also had a grants program as well, both academic and for our ecosystem tools, and also just like high potential projects. And so I'm working on that, and then I'm also working on a cybersecurity engagement. So I'm starting to do some freelancing, and so that conversation we just had about like that human side of ethics, that human side of risk. This is where the cybersecurity, privacy, all of that really start to become very important to me, because I'm starting to see the whole thing of you have shadow IT. For those of you who don't know, shadow IT is the thing where you work somewhere, your identity management, CISO, security people are like, sorry, you can't download that on your work computer. Or
Right.
you can't, you need admin permission to add
Mm-hmm.
this feature or do this thing. And you say, ABBA, and you go and get it and use work stuff, credentials, content, documents, whatever you want to do, just outside of the digital estate, the ring fence of the systems that your admin hard stop said you couldn't have it. So there's a whole kind of, so that's one kind of concrete example of shadow IT. But by the time I'm working on the cybersecurity stuff, we have full blown shadow AI.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
Because people are not just like, getting like freemium kind of like AI subscriptions to work on things, but they're also like they got open source stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at that, and I'm still like somewhat connected to Johnny. And when he reaches out to me, and we were working on primarily like state, federal, like the state local government kind of, and occasionally we try to pitch to federal sort of contracts in terms of like moonlighting and who you'd want to like talk to. But this was 2024, and the writing was on the wall that maybe even cybersecurity wasn't going to be safe from a lot of U.S. government budget turmoil.
Right. Right.
I
For
knew
sure.
people at the time who felt differently, and I think maybe it's a less that they felt differently and more that they hoped differently. That they were like, if there's one thing that's gonna like stick it out through like this transition period with the new administration, it's going to be cybersecurity, and then it wasn't necessarily the case. And so I saw that coming. Johnny had approached me and said, "Hey, I think there's some real there what's happening in quantum technology around specifically what's available to be commercialized."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm exploring doing like this venture studio model. I'm talking to somebody who has worked in these funds and like all that sort of thing before. Would this be something like you'd be interested in? Because you're the first person I thought of in terms of like if we're gonna do this thing like end to end and like figure out who and what it takes. Um, like I'd love your help with that. And so I
Oh.
took the holiday break to think about it. And so I decided to like wind down my role, like doing like the moonlight contracting and cybersecurity with that particular group. And then we launched Barclow about a year ago now. And that has been absolutely fascinating because when you come into quantum technology from the perspective of like, hey, like these are like these papers that are looking good. Like I'm seeing like these different like companies of various sizes, you have different funds. And then if you're like me, you're like, great, what can I log into? And the folks are like, yes, about
Yeah.
that.
Not quite. Not quite.
And so I'm like, great, that's why we're here. So yeah, so that's how we found our way into what we've been building, and then it's really kind of taken on a life of its own as we used our methodology. Our big focus when people say like, what does commercialization mean to you? That's a big word. Means kind of like an ink blot test, right? Like it means different things to different people when you hold it up. Um, to us, when particularly for like what Barclow focuses on with quantum and critical tech, research, roadmap, revenue. That's what commercialization means to us. So research comes from the basis of science.
Mm-hmm.
Science is never through because we are mortals currently constrained by space and time. So there's
Mm-hmm.
always going to be more to learn about the world around us and the world within us and the materials we're made of. So that's science. But then when you get to the roadmap, that's when you can start engineering from science into specific technologies. And that part right there, right? It's like when you go to look at foundational science and you go to apply it, that's when you can start that kind of engineering, like that roadmap sort of lens on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, it's like, well, I think people here want to get this out into the world and get adequately compensated for it. So then that's when we can get to that revenue part. But that is the supply value chain and life cycle like unto itself, in terms of just even using that kind of framework for how we assess things and pursue them.
So let me ask you. So every deep tech career hits bottlenecks.
Mm.
What has been your most frustrating stuck moment, and how did you work your way through it?
Man, it the thing is that what what could have been perceived as a bottleneck when we started this work, and it definitely created a lot of friction for sure, is really just that as soon as we started the venture studio, and we just even soft launched that we were like looking at doing this, there was excitement like like in terms of like our community and all of that, because we're right now the only venture studio like in our region and in the Pacific Northwest that even focuses on quantum tech and like critical tech applications specifically. And
Hmm.
we were, of course, like we're new people, they're rooting for you, they hope you make it, like, they're like, I'm not really sure what a venture studio is. So there's like excitement, there's hope, there's good vibes. But then there was also like the realization that like, hey, like you guys want to do this now when Washington State still doesn't have a quantum hub,
Okay.
and many people have tried, right? Like people have like worked very very closely with who they could, when they could, how they could, and they made organizations and they've made pitches and proposals and all of that. And so it's one of those things where, and I think this happens like honestly with all sorts of things in innovation, right? Where it's like, how are you going to make it and how are you going to hang in there when like it feels like everybody else is kind of like striking out, like despite like their best efforts.
Right.
And we couldn't really like answer that question per se, right? Because it's like, first of all, we're just getting started and we're
Right.
still like learning and discovering and like how we want to do this. But second, you know, on the one hand, you could look at it like we're making this regional play and that isn't here yet in our backyard. But the flip side of it was by the time we were looking at Barclow, like there was like a dozen states that did have programs and hubs, right? Maryland, Colorado, like what's going on in Chicago and Illinois, New York, New Mexico. So like there were things. So I think that was the one thing where it was like, you know, I was excited to show people that we don't have to like wander in the dark. Success leaves clues. And there was just such a low awareness that there were those sorts of hubs that you could be learning from. So that's kind of how I took it. It's like, yeah, like is that a bottleneck for sure in terms of like scale and traction and what's like kind of in the advantage of these other states and their initiatives. But we now have like several years, like a couple years, I should say, of data from multiple deep tech hubs that we could learn from. And I actually credit like that sort of like body of work with how we were able to make heads or tails of like directionally like how do we assess like where we fit and what we want to work on and really like make that roadmap ourselves. Because I always like to use like Colorado, I grew up there, but CU, like their translational funding, the way that they are so intentional and structured. I mean, CU Boulder I think is up to like 10 unicorn spinouts alone
That's
across deep
fantastic.
tech areas, right? And then
Mhm.
I gotta give a shout out to my buddy Jason Yeager and everybody out in Montana, the Montana Photonics Hub. Amazing work going
Mhm.
on in Montana. And so it's one of those things where, once again, if you wanna go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so it's like, hey, you might not have that in your backyard, or maybe your company doesn't have a quantum initiative, your state, your whatever doesn't. But man, this is a big world, and there's a lot of countries over 40 that do, and there's a bunch of states that do, and you can learn from those folks, and they're actually really cool and really helpful, by the way. And
That's
they're excited
fantastic.
to hear more and more people want to learn from them, and especially learn from their mistakes and their frustrations.
So, from your vantage point, what separates deep tech venture building from traditional startup building?
I say in the US, well, all building in like many things in life, everything has to do with context.
Hmm. Okay.
And I think in this case, in the US, the context of regular venture, like uh, venture in the US that has had like a established kind of like track record model, etc., has been very software oriented in tech.
Okay. Okay.
And so when you have an industry that looks to de-risk and analyze and kind of pick winners based off of historical lagging indicators, and particularly lagging indicators around things more like software or like in some cases like consumer packaged goods, like that sort of thing. As soon as you call it, like I know some people call it deep tech, I kind of have started referring to it as more built world,
Okay.
And the reason I use that turn of phrase is because, like, well, first of all, like, kind of like Internet of Things used to be Internet of Things, and now that's just Alexa. I think that deep tech is going to take that same
Okay.
track where we used to call it deep tech, and now it's just well, of course, like, we need that for satellites in space, like, like, of course I need that for, like, my internet, like my modular energy kind of thing, right? So yeah, I think that that's part of it. There's this software piece that deep tech, like, just what we consider is going to change, but also like the economics, the cycle time, the implications, the talent needed for software, fundamentally different than things you need for the physical world, or things that have a huge dependency on a physical world hardware component. And I know some people are like, well, just call it hardware. I'm like, well, we've tried that, and what happens is you say hardware, and people are like, oh, so you mean like chips?
Right.
You mean like, well, what do you mean when you say hardware?
Right.
Right? And so I
Hmm.
try to use something more inclusive, like physical and built world, because like your, like, these like headphones, right? Some, like, people are like, oh, like, that's auxiliary equipment hardware, right? But there's also these like really cool, like, sort of like the way that you have like the VR, immersive reality, AR, like, headsets. They have versions of those, and kind of like the Google Glass sort of thing, for mechanics working on engines,
Okay.
right? So that's an application of all these different types of technology, and people still don't think of that as like hardware per se. But the cycle time to have a quality product like that, figure out who's going to make it, who's going to buy it, how much is it going to cost, like, once again, that commercialization side. For software, the friction points, the cost, like that physical world constraints just aren't there, uh, the way that they are in deep tech. And so I think that sort of thing where you're talking about, like, everything from timelines to like the ramp up cost. That's the thing everybody always talks about, is like the upfront capital to even get started with this stuff, as a is a big barrier to entry as well. And so yeah, I think it's those sorts of like functional, financial, operational, et cetera, differentiators. And then with it is the risk, right? So some people don't really want to stomach the risk of like a failed, like these failed prototypes, et cetera, because like that's kind of like one of those sort of sunk cost things. And this is also why, governments and like the US, we have these like grants and everything really starting to kick up non-dilutive funding to help underwrite some of those risks, because our grants programs like that have known for a very long time that what the market will bear doesn't necessarily align with what we probably can and should be working on. But businesses and budgets and all of that don't necessarily want to take that risk, or necessarily should, right? Because they're accountable to investors, shareholders, et cetera, that, that's not necessarily in thesis or what they signed up for.
Let me ask you this. What misconceptions about quantum investing do you encounter the most often?
That everything's a computer. And until
Okay.
we have the big one, nothing works, nothing's ready.
Okay.
Very, very all or nothing. And also very like only computer. So like I ask people about, like, well, what do you think about like quantum sensors? And they're like, what are those? And I'm like, awesome. And they're like, here, let me show you a couple examples. Um, so so I think that's one, is that the I think the primary kind of like education or awareness for a lot of investors, even like in emerging tech around quantum, is the news cycle, is the US news cycle, at least like where we're at. And so if you're only looking at the US news cycle, and you kind of train your algorithm to give you those sort of updates or whatever about it, you're seeing like stock news about D-Wave and IonQ. You're seeing stuff about like IBM and HSBC and their latest thing. You're seeing, like, that's what you're seeing, right? And so some of this stuff like that really lives like behind the curtain, even if it is useful, successful, et cetera, like, you're not going to necessarily see it until it's like newsworthy that way. And
Okay.
it can create this perception that if it's not in the news cycle, or if like my timeline and people are like still debating about it, there must not be anything out there to use or buy.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you my last question is there's a lot of quantum corridors that are populating around the world. Where do you see the next unexpected quantum hub emerging?
Ooh, like around the world, or like
Mhm.
within the domain?
let's say around the world?
You know what? I can't answer that question yet, but I will say this. I think I will have I will have some contenders in mind very shortly because I'm actually leaving for Japan tomorrow.
Oh my
But
gosh, Japan. There's so
yes,
much in
yeah.
Japan. I'm like, I want to talk to you after you come back.
Yes, I was gonna say, I was like, so I haven't been there yet, but like I haven't, so I've been there for leisure. I love it in Japan. I'm leaving for a trade delegation, a quantum ecosystem trade delegation trip
Awesome.
that Barclow was selected for. We were so excited. We were one of 15 organizations, companies like enterprises, that kind of thing, between US and Canada that were selected to go to this one.
Fantastic.
So I'm heading to Japan tomorrow, and then I'm also part of Quantum Tech World Boston, and there's a whole bunch of amazing folks from national labs and quantum corridors who are planning to be there. And I'm serving on the startup advisory board, so we're preparing. Excuse me, we're preparing to do some like VIP events. We're excited to meet so many people. If you just Google Quantum Tech Boston 2026, you'll see it. Peter Shore is the keynote. I know. Like, come on. So anyway, what I'm saying is I'm going to have a much more informed answer here in the next few months. But I think more than like what's unexpected, like surprise. Like, I mean, one of the things I tell people is like, yeah, they're like, oh, you're going to Japan for quantum stuff. I'm like, yeah, like they built their own quantum computer, like in country, vertically integrated. And you know me, like I supply chain logistics, the Toyota way. They do it, they lean it out. That's where we get Six Sigma, you know, the land of Kaizen. So like so I'm geeks for lots of reasons, and so I think that surprises people even here.
Right.
That you know that they built out that capability, and now they're thinking about talent, they're thinking about materials, they're thinking about like all those things, and they're thinking about, hey, we built a computer, what do we run on it?
Right.
Which is where we come in, and we love that stuff. And so that's why I asked if you want to like surprise and be domain, because I think that that's going to be where the surprise is going to come from. Is going
Okay.
to be on like this data layer and like
Uh-huh.
people realizing like, oh, like if you build a MacBook and you don't have like a suite or like an internet connection, like what are you going to do with the computer, right? So
Right.
like,
That's a
and
really pretty paperweight, like.
yeah, yeah. And so I think like that, and particularly I think that we are going to see some like application algorithms, that sort of thing. And what's really going to surprise people is they didn't even have to know it was quantum to like it and to know it was really cool.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's
Oh,
that's my prediction.
this has been such a great conversation. Where can people find out more about what you're doing currently? Where can I send them
Yes.
to?
Yeah, so definitely you can send them to our website. It's barclow.ventures. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm posting on there pretty much all the time. I'm doing the building out loud sort of thing. And yeah, I'm happy to follow up with you as well, Candace, if your listeners have any specific questions.
That's
And I
excellent.
think
And
you and I are going to be chatting, I hope anyway.
absolutely. Because I want to hear about how the trip goes and what happened. I want to be involved. So we will be speaking again for sure. You were a fantastic interview. I really enjoyed our conversation. I really did.
Likewise, Candace, this was a lot of fun. I hope it was helpful, and I hope to see you guys around.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to let the music take us out.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you again. I really, really appreciate your time today. It was wonderful. And enjoy your trip, and I want to hear all about it.
Oh, thank you so much. No, this was a lot of fun. And yeah, I hope that the audience likes that we had like a little quantum ladies talk.
Honestly, we
Like
did. It
some
was
real talk.
wonderful. It went like that. It flowed. It was beautiful. I really, really enjoyed it. And I really like your perspective. And that's what I think is so important, is just to show the different perspectives that there are. And people, younger ladies, can find the data points that match with them, that they're like they can relate better. So this was exactly what I was going for.